Welcome back to Wild Journeys. My name is Peter van Kets. Imagine going sea kayaking off one of the most remote parts of the east coast of Africa. Picture the scene. Pristine tropical islands with palm trees and massive baobab trees. Crystal clear turquoise water and reefs teeming with fish and turtles and sharks. The journey that myself and 3 friends from Cape Town took up to the Quirimbas Islands was one of the most spectacular journeys of my life. In this documentary, Kayaking the Quirimbas, you'll see some amazing footage of us kayaking through these wild islands and experiencing the local people, encounters with wild sharks and ocean currents. An amazing journey. Enjoy this documentary.
The Quirimbas Archipelago is one of the last true wilderness areas left in Africa. It is a string of 32 paradise islands stretching about 250 kilometers along the largely underdeveloped coast of northern Mozambique. We, a group of 4 friends, wanted to explore this paradise. Our goal was to island hop from Quirimbas Island down south to Pemba mainland using sea kayaks running with the monsoon trade winds. The team consisted of Mark van der Velde, a plastic surgeon and a complete natural in all water sports, and a good friend of his, Charles Standing, who is a rigger by trade. They are completely at home on the water and focus on not taking life too seriously. Incidentally, they call each other Mark and Charles, in case there's any confusion. Peter van Kets is a bit of a nutter. Last year, he and Bill Godfrey completed and won the International Woodvale rowing race, 5,000 kilometers across the Atlantic, unsupported. I decided that he would be in my boat. My name is Nick Good, sometimes called Moose. As part of Fresh Air Crew, I have found myself on some pretty interesting adventures all over the world. My job will be trying to keep up with the others and documenting this adventure.
Yeah, unlike Pete, who was fit, we went out on a mission to get fit. Yeah, we did some training on the flat water, and we did some in the surf.
There we are. Our first training session, rather successful really.
Yes, yeah, rather good. Oh man, it's coming correct.
There was the usual pre-adventure frenzy. We had a lot of admin to do, and the north monsoon winds were coming, so we had to get going quickly. When we got to the CFA light aircraft, the pilot who was going to fly us up to Vamizi almost had a cadenza. He took one look at all our luggage and told us promptly that we were about 100 kilos overweight.
We were going to be supported by MozambiqueTravel.com and Ibo Island Lodge. They'd helped us put this expedition together and provided us with an experienced backup crew. If all went according to plan, they would meet us with our kayaks on Quirimbas Island. Even though it was a relatively short flight, we could see that it was going to be a pretty long paddle.
Landing on Quirimbas Island was interesting. It's a long, thin island with a runway across it, so it feels like you're going to run off the other side.
It's a fantastic feeling is when you just dropped off in this place and the aeroplane flies away and there you are in this paradise waiting to start your mission. Great excitement.
We wanted to be backed up by the local people and local winds, so a dhow seemed like the perfect option.
Our support crew was waiting for us, and immediately we took a liking to the friendliness of Yasin, Dollar and Juma, the dhow captain.
Mark,
Yeah,
what you doing?
I'm sharpening my spear, bro.
We took advantage of the luxury of a Mozambique Island lodge to prepare our boats.
Packing a sea kayak is quite an art. There's a delicate balance between packing too much and moving through the water like sludge, and packing too little and having no safety equipment or medical supplies or backup food. Taking the boats, you've got to take into account all the what-ifs. You need safety equipment, life jackets, sat phone, medical equipment, radios. Charlie tends to be the sort of guy who tends to run with as little as possible. Moose and I, on the other hand, would take the kitchen sink if we could. And Pete tends to be somewhere in the middle of those two groups.
When my paddle dipped into the water for the first time, I felt like the real journey had just begun.
It was just incredible to actually be out there.
The beauty of kayaking is its simplicity. You can get into amazing places. It's incredibly eco-friendly. You leave a very low carbon footprint. It's a soul way of life. Because of the tremendous tidal differences that occur in these islands.
We're the wrong island.
No, we're right island, but I mean it's still, the island's very long. We're in the wrong side.
We soon realized that just using a chart wasn't going to cut it. So we pulled out the GPS.
We arrived at Kayaking Island, our first night stop. I just remember thinking to myself, so far away from the city. It was the most incredible feeling of freedom.
Where in this crazy world of ours do you ever get to spend time on a wild, deserted island? The magic of the Quirimbas was unweaving itself, and we were all taken in by it.
Being on an island like that and suddenly finding that you're there and you're pretty much the only people there, and in this amazing environment, just everything, all the life that you've had beforehand leading up to this just drains away, and suddenly you find that you're in the moment.
Good food, good friends, things could be a hell of a lot worse. Almost immediately we slotted into a routine. Things in the Quirimbas are run not by a watch or by any modern day influence, they run by the tide, low tide and high tide, and we had to get used to those things.
We were waiting for the moon to get in the right place. You had to lose all concept of time. We'd wake and we'd travel when the tide was right, and when wasn't, we'd just wait, just like it's been for hundreds of years.
One of the beauties of the Quirimbas is that the people are so friendly. We never once felt threatened or uneasy. There was a real camaraderie on the sea. They were as happy to meet us as we were to meet them. Their culture is very much still intact, and it's amazing. Paddling out into the horizon is quite a daunting feeling, because if you miss the island that you're paddling towards, and it's quite easy to do that because the islands are so flat and so low, if you miss one, then you could be in serious trouble. We had to rely heavily on our navigational instruments. Things can go pear-shaped very quickly when kayaking out at sea, and one needs to be prepared in case of any eventuality. You need to have backup plans. You need to have the right equipment for any emergency. If you're going to survive out at sea during a storm or anything like that, one needs to be prepared. Safety on a trip like this is absolutely paramount. Our first rule was that whenever things got rough, we would wear our life jackets. And when it was calm, we would have our life jackets ready to be put on at any given moment.
There are obviously a number of hazards one has to look out for when you're paddling between islands. Sunstroke, dehydration, getting lost, getting blown out to sea, getting caught out in the dark, not getting to your destination in time. Bad weather conditions, bad tides, running out of food, and water was one of our biggest concerns. On more than one occasion, we were completely sea-locked. We'd do a 360-degree turn and you would see absolutely no land. And we would think to ourselves, I hope we got those GPS coordinates right. Being able to communicate amongst each other is essential, and the two-way radio systems really were helpful, especially when it came to announcing lunch.
Sushi!
Sushi!
Do you want to do it again? You're paddling towards a tiny island in the middle of nowhere. And eventually the island comes out, and then you pass a tiny village that looks like it's been forgotten by time. It's like traveling back in the past 100 years, 200 years. It's amazing that you can see a village with 40, 50, or between 50 and 100 people in it. And you don't hear a single sound of any motor. Completely isolated from the rest of the world. Quite a unique experience. And the tide was receding, and we got completely surrounded by reef. And we lost sight of the island. And then Charlie came up with a great idea to try and see the island again. Quirimbas Island arrived in the nick of time. After a long 8-hour paddle, we were ready for a rest.
Quirimbas Island is an incredible honeymoon island. There's a stark beauty to it.
And it was a great opportunity for Mark to treat his tendonitis and to go fishing and diving.
Rani Resorts kindly put us up. We were very well looked after. I would really love to take my wife there, and most people were taking their wives there. We got some really strange, funny looks.
The local fishermen were some of the fittest and toughest men I had ever seen. They would go out to sea for days on end in traditional canoes called casquinhas.
We often thought we were quite tough. 4 or 5 hours off an island in the middle of absolutely nowhere. And then a speck would start coming towards you, and you'd realize it's a dugout canoe. No backup. We were kind of put in our place. The locals obviously have to catch fish to survive. We couldn't help notice that the fishing was rather indiscriminate. There were plenty of endangered species, and it's a problem, and I guess that's where the establishment of the Quirimbas National Park has been helping us.
The park is unique in that it was created principally at the request of the local communities. And on the islands and on the coast, they were facing a serious problem with fish depletion and very low fish stocks. And these two issues came together, and the idea of creating a national park to address the issue of natural resource use came up. And so the park really grew from the bottom up.
We still had a long way to go, so we pushed on towards Mozambique Island. Amongst the locals, it's a spiritual island.
We were really excited to get to Mozambique Island. It lies on the northern border of the Quirimbas National Park. We found the perfect campsite under a beautiful tree. And what a place it was for us to just empty our minds and rest and just be at peace with everything around us. We were wowed by the island. It was completely uninhabited, bar a few fishermen.
When we set out to walk around Mozambique Island, I felt a little bit like Winnie the Pooh setting out on an expedition. Everybody had gathered their things, and it was walking time, no more paddling time. As we were walking around, crossing reefs and climbing over rocks, it almost felt like we were the first people to see it.
It was great to stretch the legs and explore on foot. The island has these amazing little coves and caves and private beaches. We kept coming across these funny little water spouts at low tide on the exposed reef. And this got us thinking about where it was coming from.
We went and looked inside the interior of the island and discovered this big saltwater lake, and it was surrounded by mangroves.
One of the highlighted chill times for me was setting up a hammock over the sacred lake on Mogundula Island. I remember lying there, listening to the sound of the palms, the mangrove trees above me, the fish eagles. It was just amazing. Wonder what all the rich people are doing.
We were running out of water. Duma and Dollar had decided to go to the local fishing village, Pangane, to stock up with some supplies. I was very excited about sailing a dhow. This would be the first time in my sailing career. It was a privilege watching Duma handle the boat and navigate.
To see how these crafts or these vessels sailed, how they were rigged, how they were crewed, you know, the simplicity, but how efficient and effective it all was.
One of the things that really impressed me was I saw this man shooting up and down these huge coconut trees with pieces of rope keeping his heels together. In the time it took us to walk 100 meters past him, he must have climbed about 10 trees. And these were high up. If he'd fell, he would have been in serious trouble.
We had been warned that the village of Pangan was the pirate center of the north. And when we got there, it was quite the opposite. We found the people to be friendly and hospitable.
Oh, it was a lovely experience, it really was. To see how the people live, everybody was very friendly. It was special. It was, I would have liked to have spent more time there.
In everyday life, it's so easy to take simple but essential things like water for granted.
Taking a trip like this is essential every now and again, just to teach you again about the basics, like gathering water. Rolos Island was the first time on our trip where the wind really picked up enough for us to get out our kiting toys and have some fun. It was fantastic to see the reaction of the locals. They'd clearly never seen a kite before.
Kiteboarding they could relate to because it's something they live with every day, and the wind and the water, and there it is in a different form, and they understood it, they got it completely.
They know how to use wind and they're absolute masters at it, but I guess that they'd never seen the way we do it. Even the smallest jumps we did on the kite, they were absolutely going off. Hey, what a life. A good kiting session in the middle of nowhere, Pete organising our supper. Doesn't get better than this.
There was a lot of activity from the crabs getting their homes ready for the night. This seemed like a good place to stay, so we set up camp right on the beach.
Kayaking is really eco-friendly. It leaves a very low carbon footprint. It's quiet, there's no smoke, there's no noise, and the locals do it too.
When we got to Matemo Island, we were invited to go fishing. It was amazing to see Mark getting his hands around a fishing rod and reel. For somebody who is an absolute genius at operating on hands and fixing hands, he was amazingly useless with a fishing rod. But in the end, he definitely won the Fishing Progress Award. Charlie, on the other hand, got the Silver Rod Award by catching a 25-kilogram giant ignobilis kingfish.
We paddled on from Matemo, and there in the middle of the ocean, we saw this big chunk of metal in the middle of nowhere. We came closer and realized it was a wreck. So we tied a rope on and jumped in the water, and we had this amazing experience of diving on this wreck in the middle of nowhere with no land in sight. It was awesome.
I needed to check on one of my patients via satellite phone, so we needed to stop. And after paddling south towards Ibo Island, we came across a sand spit in the middle of the ocean. And the coolest thing was that a bunch of people from Ibo Island Lodge were having lunch on it, so we joined them and I made my call.
Arriving on Ibo was like journeying back in history. We really got a sense of arriving somewhere completely unique. Throughout Ibo's history, explorers, captains, pirates, and thousands upon thousands of dhows have navigated these oceans laden with goods of trade. As early as AD 600, Arab traders made contact with the local inhabitants of Ibo. They established trading posts with forts along the coasts, and slaves, gold, and ivory were shipped via traditional sailing dhows to the Arab world.
We used Ibo Island Lodge as a base for our next few days' exploration.
Portuguese and Muslim traders battled it out for control for much of the 1500s, and the Portuguese won. Slaves were a big business, and the Portuguese were very active in sending slaves all over the world, bringing the wealth and prosperity to Ibo. Today there are forts, slave warehouses, villas in various states of ruin. Wandering around this colonial ghost town, you can almost feel the legends crunching under your feet. João Baptiste is the oldest living historian of Ibo Island. He is 80 years old now and has lived an incredible life. He worked for the Portuguese colonial administration on Ibo before siding with the independence movement when it began to take hold. As a result, he spent some time as a prisoner in the fort on his own island. He lived to tell the story, while many others did not.
Ibo Island is also a living, breathing island, and the lodge does a great Ibo of today experience.
The local people on Ibo Island were incredibly friendly. On our visit to their villages, they were very hospitable.
Once again, it was time to head on, and just like every other place we'd stopped at, we were pretty sad to leave.
No, but it doesn't help.
Oh, right or left?
Right.
In 1794, the governor decreed that a canal be cut between the island of Ibo and Quirimba. It was cut by slaves. Shackled together, they worked in the thick mud through the night, hacking at the sturdy mangroves to cut their path. Thankfully, those days are over, although the canal is still used today to link Ibo and Quirimbas Islands. We found the canal a place of great peace, and it is one of the most fragile ecosystems left on Earth. We used this canal to get to the Quirimbas Island, but in so doing, we underestimated the tidal push.
Yes, that's the one.
We arrived late at Quirimbas Island, and this meant that the tides had caught us out. At high tide, the waves lapped the beach next to the campsite, but at low tide, it's more than half a kilometre over rough rocks that one has to walk. But we weren't the only ones caught out by the tide.
Should we try and save this oak?
Okay, who's going to pick him up?
That's Moose's job.
Okay.
Why is it Moose's job?
Maybe we'll find a bit of fun. He looks quite healthy to me.
After a rapid debate, we decided not to interfere with nature, and then we saw the moray eel dive into a very small hole with water and vanish.
This was just another one of those perfect moments. We were dead hungry and came across some fishermen hauling in nets with these tiny fish. Before we could even ask, Dolo and Juma had whipped out their little charcoal stove called a fuga and fired it up to fry us a feast.
Delicious.
Our last stopover was yet another Quirimba gem, Sito. Peter knew the owners of Sito Lodge, who hail from his hometown, East London. Walking through the mangrove swamps, climbing those massive baobab trees, watching the mud skippers, and swimming in that warm, iridescent water made it much harder for us to leave and head off for Pemba.
Our last hurdle was paddling around Ponte Diablo, the Point of the Devil. We'd been warned that this part was very dangerous. and we were expecting the worst, but apart from a 20 km/h headwind and a 6.5 hour paddle, it wasn't too bad.
Just before we reached the end of our journey, a huge humpback whale popped up right in front of us, as if to bid us a final farewell. I had quite a mixed emotion going through me. I really didn't want the trip to end, and at the same time I wanted to get home to see my wife and my young daughter.
Well, there are a lot of highlights. I mean, just the absolute beauty of the Quirimbas and also the local people. I really enjoyed their simplicity, the way they are, and be happy with what they've got. And I think that's, yeah, that appealed to me. It really did.
The locals here are incredibly friendly. They're warm, giving people. Not once did I feel threatened. I would certainly love to bring my family and recommend it to anybody. That it's a very special experience. I would definitely do it again.
Kayaking in the Quirimbas was an incredible adventure. It was like being in this world of suspended reality, and I'll do it again, anytime. I just need the invite.